Thank you very much. I did spend a lot of time in the last 20 years or 25 years in the war zones of the world. Prior to being a diplomat for a decade when I served Czech government as Deputy Foreign Minister and Ambassador to Israel, I used to run for a decade a Czech NGO called People in Need, which is the largest Central European NGO working in the war zones. It used to be Balkans and former USSR. Now, of course, it's in the Middle East and other areas. So that's also where I will be coming from in my presentation, and where I'm coming from in my approach to cybersecurity and cyber warfare. Because believe me, or you will believe it, I don't understand anything, almost anything from the technical point of view. It's hard for me to operate a computer, as it always functions differently, even with a stupid presentation like this, so it's hard to go around. But my experience from those war zones, from diplomacy and the security part of the diplomacy, as well as my experience from Israel, is basically the approach which I have, and you will see it interlinked in the whole presentation. I am here, I've written several institutes, which is one private college dealing with security studies in Czech Republic in Prague, where I am vice president now, and Cybergym, which is an Israeli cybersecurity company, basically the unique company in the world which is focusing on training people in the real environment, or as much as real as it could be. So it's not the simulations on the computer, it's really training people on attacking them not by computer but by hackers, and especially focusing on the energy systems, but basically overall into the critical infrastructure. At the end, I hope that there will be this Cybergym arena serving Europe, based in not far from here around Prague, but it hasn't happened yet. And this is also why the topic is failure of human factor in the starting year of cyber war. I will argue that the cyber war for Israelis has started already 20 years ago. For us, it's starting now, in the past few years, and of course, it's different situation for us, for Americans, for British, or for Estonians, where there has been much more going on than here. At least what we know and what we could find out. And the overall link is that no matter, and that's the Israeli approach, and I will speak about it with the Israeli experience, no matter how much you invest into the hardware and software, which you have to do, the real strength and weakness of the cyber war is the human factor. Because at the end, if you ask Israelis where they have been successful in conducting an attack in the offensive sense, or defending themselves as one of the most attacked country and nation in the world regarding the cyber attacks, and not only the cyber attacks, then they will tell you that always it was the critical point was the human factor. So this is basically what I am focusing on during my work, study with my experience, and what I will be focusing on during the presentation. As we had yesterday announcement of the signed deal with Iranians, I will, to understand what we are talking about, what I'm talking about regarding the cyber warfare, I will show you a 3-minute or 3-minute 20 seconds long film about Stuxnet, which was used infecting Iranian centrifuges, and which is one of the best examples of how the cyber warfare can be used, what are its limits, and definitely it is also one of the examples that at the end, no matter how you employ the technology, the software, hardware, etc., the real issue and the real weakness and how it got into the Iranian system was through the people. Let me start it.
In June last year, a computer virus called Stuxnet was discovered lurking in the databanks of power plants, traffic control systems, and factories around the world. 20 times more complex than any previous virus code, it had an array of capabilities. Among them, the ability to turn up the pressure inside nuclear reactors or switch off oil pipelines, and Stuxnet could tell the system operators everything was normal. Unlike most viruses, Stuxnet doesn't carry the usual forged security clearance that helps viruses burrow into systems. It actually had a real clearance, stolen from one of the most reputable computer technology companies in the world. It exploited security gaps that system creators are unaware of. These holes are known as 0 days, and the most successful viruses exploit them. The details of a 0 day can be sold on the black market for $100,000. Stuxnet took advantage of 20 0 days. But once it got into a system, it didn't always activate. Buried deep in the Stuxnet code was a specific target. Without that target, the virus remained dormant. What was it looking to shut down? The centrifuges that spin nuclear material at Iran's enrichment facilities. Stuxnet was a weapon. The first to be made entirely out of code. The Washington-based Institute for Science and International Security says the virus may have shut down 1,000 centrifuges at Natanz, Iran's main enrichment facility, last year. In November, the International Atomic Energy Agency, the UN's nuclear watchdog, said Iran had suspended work at its nuclear facilities without explaining why. Many observers credited Stuxnet. Last month, the Iranian government conceded the virus's infection of the Bashir nuclear facility, still under construction, meant that switching the plant on could lead to a national electricity blackout. Iran has responded to the attack with an open call for hackers to join the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and has reportedly amassed the second largest online army in the world. So who was behind Stuxnet? There's no evidence beyond rumor. Some have it that Israel is responsible because the virus code apparently contains references to the Hebrew Bible. Others believe the US was involved in the testing and development. The finger has even been pointed at Siemens mobile phone company, whose software is used by the Iranian regime. The most important question may not be who designed it, but who will redesign it. The evolution has been so fast that 9 months after its detection, the first virus that could crash power grids or destroy oil pipelines is available online for anyone to download and tinker with. You can watch people on YouTube pulling Stuxnet apart. It's an open source weapon. And there's no way of knowing who will use it or what they will use it for.
No matter what country you are from, if you just read the newspapers, you basically, or the media or the internet, you basically have news of attacks, and discovered attacks and failed attacks on everyday basis. Here in Czech Republic, it was even revealed that some databases were hacked yesterday. A few days ago, there was the news about the Italian company hacking team, which is producing very not unique, because there are some other companies in the world doing that, Israeli companies as well, of course, but very capable software of penetrating your computers and cell phones, etc., for usually sold under the license to the intelligence services, police, etc. Of course, some of the products are not only sold for that. Even that specialized company has been hacked, and everything was put on the internet. So there is even now a debate that the special force of the Czech police was using it, and how much it paid for that, and if it's legal or illegal to use it, etc. And definitely there will be some news next week regarding the cybersecurity coming from the world or even here. If you ask the Czech banks, the Czech telecommunication companies to compare how many attacks they are facing today compared to a year ago and 3 years ago. They will tell you that it's going always, the number is always higher and higher. And of course, and what is even more important, they will tell you that the attacks are more and more sophisticated. And those are, of course, the attacks which they are able to discover and they are able to see. Not that there would be more of the attacks which are unseen, but usually the attacks which are unseen are those attacks which you should be more afraid of. For example, the cyber gym I'm working for, it's a company which is half owned by the Israeli Electric Corporation, which is the Israel Electric Grid as well as the power plants. It's basically a monopoly. The second half is the people from who used to work for the cyber command in Israel. And this Israeli Electric Grid and Electric Production Company is facing about 8,000 attacks per day. Of course, out of those 8,000 attacks per day, 95% are very weak attacks, but 5% are considered to be serious, and few out of them are considered to be very serious on the daily basis. When I saw the data from the Czech telecommunication companies and communications companies and Czech banks, of course they are not attacked as the Israelis from around the world, but their data show it. There is because of the new Czech law about the cybersecurity, which came into effect on the 1st of January this year, so there has to be monitoring, and all the critical infrastructure companies, be it state or non-state, private, fully private, partly private, have to report to the National Center about the attacks. Not all of them have started to be reporting yet, but you could see a huge increase. Part of that in the database of the attacks. Part of that is, of course, due to the fact that they have to report. There was no reporting done in the past, but part of that it also shows that there is an increase of the attacks and the sophistication of the attacks. One of the problems which we are facing on the basis of NATO or EU, that there is no one methodology, there is no one system, so it's very hard to compare the data with the other countries. The other countries are first keeping the data for themselves, which is fine. The problem is that still most of the countries do not have the data, and they are not able to collect the data about their critical infrastructure and what is happening there, because there is no system. So in this way we are among the still few countries which have some kind of methodology and some kind of law and some kind of system at place. Again, some kind of system at place which was modeled on US, Norway, partly on Israel and their experience, where they have created this kind of system and in Israel and this kind of national system and monitoring and the response teams, etc., about 10 years ago. So we are a decade behind them. It doesn't matter that much if we are going to be catching up, because they are already, as I said, in the cyber warfare for 20 years, for 2 decades, and they are, of course, on the front line. And even from the, let's say, continental Europe, we are definitely not as Czech Republic on the front line, not as the countries which were attacked and which were facing serious problems in the past, like Estonia already mentioned, and of course not countries like UK, even now more and more Germany. That means the big nations with huge infrastructure, with a lot of wealth, because a lot of attacks are not part of the cyber warfare as such, of course. Most of them are criminals, activists, trying to steal money, trying to affect companies' functioning. You could see as from the data, for example, on from US, that there is an annual disclosure of the, I don't know what is the name of the regulatory agency or the body in the US. On the annual basis, they are saying which of the electricity producers or energy producers is the most contributing to the pollution. The day it is announced, the data, the company and the power plant which is on the top, or few of them who are on the top, they see immediately within a few seconds being attacked. being attacked by the activists, by the green activists of trying to punish those who are contributing to global warming as they see it and who are the polluters. But you could see it, so the companies which are there and which are expecting to be high up on that list, they should be aware that they will be attacked, basically massively, and they are attacked. So sometimes you can predict what is happening, and those trends which are now in US, as those trends which are now in Israel, will in some way come into continental Europe as such, and it's coming. And I will show some. Some examples. What is the Israeli experience? The Israeli experience comes really from the experience of fighting wars for 67 years from its independence. At the end, the Israeli approach, and as I was saying how critical the human factor is, the Israeli approach is very much linked to the approach of how you defend yourself or how you fight the regular wars as we know them. Even how you fight the irregular wars or the hybrid wars and the terrorism, as we do not know them that much. We know them from some distance, like from Ukraine, but the Israelis know them from their experience from at home and, let's say, nearest abroad. Everything what is seen as the cyber warfare is something like new. There in the Israeli experience, it's not that new. As I said, roughly for 20 years. But it even goes to other techniques and other technologies. If you watch the battlefield of the day in the Middle East, especially on the Israeli front line, you could predict what will be the battlefield of the future more globally. You do see that in the terrorism trends. You can see that in the cyber warfare, and you could see that with the UAVs. By the very first UAV in combat was used in 1982, where here in Czech Republic we didn't even know that something like that exists. In 1982 in the first Lebanon war. Of course not as sophisticated as they are being used now, of course not bombarding anything, collecting data, but being used in the war as part of the overall combat operation. And the first cyber activities were used also in the 90s as part of the warfare, and not only collecting intelligence. What the Israelis do claim is that the cyber battlefield at the end is similar to the real battlefield. Of course, it has differences, but it is more similar than you would imagine. It is more similar from the point of view if you want to win and if you want to control, if you want to defeat the enemy or if you want to defend your positions, then at the end you must be on the ground. And at the end, no matter how sophisticated weapons you have to have people operating those weapons and people on the ground as the boots on the ground. If you look now what is happening and what is the debate about Western alliance, or not only Western alliance, the alliance defeating the ISIS, there is common view that ISIS will not be defeated from the air. Yes, of course it's not going to be defeated from the air, because if you don't have boots on the ground, you will not be able to defeat ISIS, you will not be able to hold the territory. If you don't hold the territory, then you are not controlling the situation. The same is regarding the cyber warfare. If you don't control the cyber territory, or the cyber territory you want to defend, or if you don't control the cyber territory of your enemy, whom you want to defeat, then you cannot be successful. And that's why the doctrine that the wars are being fought not only on the land and sea and the air, but also in the cyberspace, is nothing new. And in Israel, there is Cyber Command. In US, there is Cyber Command. In some other countries, there is Cyber Command. In Czech Republic, nothing like that, for example, exists as Cyber Command. But at least some nucleus is now being built, according to the decision from this April. So that's the trajectory, and I guess that we are going to be somewhere in saying that we have also some kind of Cyber Command it will take at least 2 years before we get there, but something is being built, there is more money allocated, people are being hired, and it's clear that without such capability, you will not be able to conduct wars, you will not be able to defend yourself properly. As another similarities with basically the real warfare and another points of the Israeli experience is, of course, that you have to know your enemy. If you wait passively and don't know who is going to attack, and if you don't look around and don't try to find out where the enemy is and what the enemy wants and what's its motivations and modus operandi, of course you are not going to be able to defend yourself. You will be surprised. Once you are surprised, it's not good for your defense, it's not good for the reaction, counter-reaction, and it's the real weakness. So it's to wait for the attack means to wait to lose, or to get into the position which is not favorable once the war or the fight starts. Again, this is the same with the tank battalions, with the Air Force, with the naval operations, and the same in the cyber arena. And for that, you have to really combine the offensive and defensive tools. And as the Israelis would say, there is no real clear cut between offense and defense. Not on the regular battlefield, not in the cyberspace, not in the hybrid wars, nowhere. At the end, if you don't think in terms of offense and defense being the two sides of the same coin, which you do not know exactly somehow how it's flipped because it's overlapping, then again you will lose. Yes, we don't like to talk about the offense, even in the regular military term. Everything is ministries of defense and everything is about defense. So now there is this term of active defense, which means offense, if you are really serious in that, because politically correctly we cannot say that we are gonna attack someone or counterattack someone. We are gonna be only defending ourselves, but the term active defense has been developed, but basically it means offensive capabilities which are being developed, because without them you cannot succeed. And this comes to the point which I already said. The key factor then in the defense and offense is the strength and weakness of the human factor. At the end, the term social engineering is to use the strength and weakness of the human factor. According to one statistic, 72% of successful cyber attacks were carried out with assistance of employees or people inside the institutions and organizations which were being attacked. Which means knowingly, unknowingly, which means that they did know what they were doing, or they did know partly what they were doing. Sometimes they were paid for that, sometimes it was ideological reasons, and sometimes they simply did not know. Because you can get into the system basically without the people that much knowing that you got into the system, using their computers or the cell phones. As was the example of the hacking team, and hacking team is not, as far as I know, not the most sophisticated what is on the world market, the penetration of the cell phones. You can penetrate the cell phones of anyone here, if it's not the old cell phones which are not on the market for already 5-10 years. You can penetrate it without any one of you really noticing that someone is controlling the cell phone. You don't even, in many instances, have to do nothing, not even to take a click, not even to respond on an email or on some message, which is a regular way how to send you an email, and that you click on it and you have the infected computer which sucks money from your bank account. You don't have to do it with those sophisticated things. You don't have to respond. You don't even have to notice it that something has happened with the phone or with the computer. Only in case that you really put the phone into the lab and really go scrutiny, sophisticated scrutiny, if there are not changes. Because the changes are very much hidden, like the Stuxnet changes, and very much like very much inside. So the the 72% number, and no matter if it's 72% or if you use different methodology and it's 80% or 60% or 50%, it's a high number. So I don't want to stick to 72%. It's not that important. It's a high number, and it gets all the weaknesses and strengths around. What is the strength? Yes, that the people know what that they should really think about, and people responsible for the systems, from the IT department, security department, from the leadership of the organizations, institutions, businesses, they should know what is possible, and they should be careful and teach their people and invest into their people. The other figure is, and I think it's the PricewaterhouseCoopers figure, it's that for every $10 million invested into the hardware and software, only $8 are invested into training of people. Again, if it was not $8 but 80 or 800, it says seriously something. And I can tell you from my own experience when working with the Cyber Gym, and when we got into one of the largest banks on the Czech market, which is part of the large European bank, when the CEO, as well as the head of the CSO, as well as the head of the CIO, so the IT guys, the security guys, and the CEO of the bank, wanted to get their people through the training at the Cyber Gym facility. For a year and a half, they have not been able, because they don't have the budget line for training and for exercise. So, and we are talking about $100,000 in a bank which makes profit of 10 billion Czech crowns. So it was not the matter of the money, of the financing. They didn't even have to ask their mother company abroad to get the approval for that. But the system for a year and a half has not been able to send their people for the training, even if everyone in the system wanted it, because there was no line for training people. Or the line for training people was there, but the budget for the whole year was not sufficient, so was less than $100,000 for the whole organization, because it was for trainings to send someone for a half-day training for $100 or $200 and to support like those activities, but not the real training. This affects also the trainings on the real simulation or on the simulation which is provided by many other companies. So a lot of companies are talking that they will increase spending for the human training, but they are still talking about it because they are not able to do it. Because it's not in the DNA of the system. By the way, it's not in the DNA of the system of a bank, which is a private bank, which I described. It's not in the DNA of the system of the state institutions. And it's even worse to change something in the state institutions that it would be functioning in that way. And it has to be flexible because the nature of the environment is really changing fast. Yes. So what is the real targets and what you can target with the cyber warfare? No matter if you are a state trying to defend yourself or trying to attack your enemies, or if you are a criminal, if you are an activist, then what is exactly, and no matter what is your reasoning why you are looking around, then you can affect basically everything. Of course, the state infrastructure, including now recently, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, when it was released that more than 4 million personal data of the US citizens from within the state structures who wanted to pass the security clearances was revealed. Of course, defense and security establishment, a week ago or 2 weeks ago, it was announced that the Patriot missile system based in Turkey, the German Patriot missiles, or under the German army, was hacked. So it's another proof that it goes really into the systems, into the defense capabilities. Of course, energy sector. Stuxnet is one example. I will have more examples there. Telecommunications, finance and banking is obvious, because once you talk to people and to talk to the officials in the Czech administration as well as to the people on the street, this is the natural thing. The hacking, it's about stealing money. or steering like identities. And it's about the IT department of any institution. This is the common belief, but it's of course much broader. You have the transportation, healthcare, media. You had the attacks of the cyber caliphate on the French TV from this April, which was now claimed, and Jiří sent me the link that it was claimed that it was actually not the cyber caliphate directly associated with the ISIS, but those links are more to the Russia. It could be true, I really don't know, both are possible. It's true that even the ISIS and of course Hezbollah and Hamas, that they have their Syrian regime, that they have their cyber unit, cyber commands. How capable those are in terms of ISIS, not clear to me now. The Hezbollah is capable. The Hamas in Gaza tried to unsuccessfully climb through the electric grid from Gaza to Israel during the last war, last fighting in Gaza next summer. Because the electric grid is one, Israel supplies the electricity to Gaza, unlike Israel with the other countries, the other neighbors, it behaves like an island. Regarding Gaza, it's not an island, and you can climb to the system through the electric wires, basically. And this they attempted. So they failed, but they have this imagination what is possible, and they are trying to do it, and they have their units which are being trained and done, and they don't have to necessarily sit in Gaza. Sometimes some of them, yes, but sometimes you can do it, of course, remotely. That's why you have all those like different attacks coming from different directions. That's why it's very hard to find out who is exactly the attacker. But at the end, if you really try to find out who is the attacker, you can do it. So I have no doubt that there has been some investigation, and it was the French sources, of course, regarding the TV5 and the Caliphate, that some Russian path was there. How much, who directed that, if it was just through the Russian territory, if it was linked to some others, I really don't know, but definitely some pieces of the evidence will come out, not in the darknet, not only in the darknet, but in the internet over the time. This is the examples of the state infrastructure, and here here this is the examples coming from Russia. The Estonian wave of Estonian attacks in 2007 as the response of this dispute about the removing of the Red Army soldier statues. It was very much publicized. It very much got into Estonia into the business, not because Estonia is very much computerized and ahead of other countries. So from the point of view of the cyber, it's also vulnerable. But this is why Estonia established this center of excellence and really started to focus on that within the NATO structures. You had Georgia, and in the war in 2008 in Georgia, the Georgian internet was basically rerouted. So the Georgian state lost control of its internet. It's partly, as you can see there, they partly got it under the control, but only temporarily. And it was clear where it's coming from. That it's from Russia. It was not hidden. And then if you look into the most intensive parts of the fighting in Ukraine, you do see the increase of the let's say cyber warfare from the Russian front. And it's not only that they would hack or would listen to the cell phone of Tory Newland, the Deputy Assistant Secretary responsible for Eastern Europe from the US, and then put it onto the media, but it was also regarding the operations on the ground. The operations on the ground, meaning also the use of the UAVs and how much you can jam the UAV and how much you can complicate it for the UAVs, which was, by the way, one of the key strengths of key points of support of the Russian army to the Ukrainians was the intelligence, and also intelligence gathered by UAVs. And they had much better picture of the battlefield and the positions of the Ukrainian army and Ukrainian forces than the Ukrainians had about the Russian or the rebels. And again, within the UAVs, of course, you use the cyber warfare directly in the operations. The energy is. You had the Stuxnet, that was the film about. You had the PlayStation network attacked in 2011. The Sony network. It was hard to believe that this recent attack on Sony, because of the film about North Korea, which was started from North Korea. North Koreans have supposedly 3,000 people working in their cyber command. So even the country, well, it's a nuclear country, but country like poor as North Korea has got, and non-developed as North Korea has got their cyber command, and they did do the damage to Sony, even after Sony had a warning, not coming from North Korea at that time, had a warning 3 years before, and they did not get prepared for that. Some people did get, not only that they lost a lot of money, but some people lost their jobs because of this, and the investigation is still ongoing. You had a huge attack on the Saudi Aramco, where the refinery basically refineries were put out for 8 days. The virus was called Shamoon, and it's also one of the most known and most now studied and most made public attacks, the similar type of the Stuxnet attack. You had blackouts in Brazil a few years ago caused by the cyber attacks. If you go into the industry, last year the hackers stopped functioning of a steel mill in Germany. And it was the first such known case, a known attack happening really in hardcore of continental Europe, is in hardcore of the industry, which was made. It was not made public what which specific steel mill it was, but it was in the BND report, annual report. So you had a massive blackout in Turkey, which at the end I don't think it was a cyber attack, but it was claimed the first day or the day of the attack. It was claimed by the Turkish government, or it was said by the Turkish government, Turkish Ministry of Energy, that they cannot rule out the cyber attack. And if you go to Turkey, I mentioned the Patriot missiles, which is right now, which happened very, very recently. I don't want to go that much on the financial sector, because you have those examples of really huge losses. Well, it's a huge industry, so it can afford huge losses. But you have it on the everyday, on the everyday basis. And those huge events you have on a monthly basis now. It's usually the larger the banks are, the more they are the U.S. banks or the British banks, then it's more made public, and they are also more natural targets. But it goes as far as to Czech Republic. And here is mentioned Kaspersky. Even Kaspersky, and it's like this similar example of the Italian hacking team. Kaspersky announced that they were under a massive attack. I would always question what Kaspersky is doing because of where Kaspersky is located, where it's coming from. It's a capable company, but if let's say NATO countries are using Kaspersky lab services in their critical infrastructure, what is happening? Then I'm a little bit nervous because it's a gigantic, very capable company, but not the one which stands 100% on our side of the world affairs. Let me put it this way. Yes, this is the cyber caliphate. It was not the French TV, TV5 was not the only attack announced or done under the name of the cyber caliphate. The high command of US was attacked by the cyber caliphate. But I already said who operates and has the cyber commands. Syria is the Syrian electronic army. Syria these days, under the circumstances of Syria fighting or Syrian army fighting 3-year-long civil war, they still maintain those capabilities and trying to operate their cyber command or their electronic armies. North Korea I mentioned, of course Iran, and it was mentioned in the Stuxnet, and Iranians are very serious in developing any capability what they want to have. It's not only nuclear capability, it's the ballistic missiles, it's the radars, and of course it's the cyber. So for defensive and offensive purposes, because as I said, they also do not see it as that either you have defense or offense, that you have one army. And I mentioned the organizations. I didn't mention Al Qaeda. Of course, Al Qaeda had their activity. One of the issues is to see what exactly is understood by us and what exactly is understood by all those players. What it means, the cyber warfare, and what everything like falls under it. There is a different school or different understanding. What is the cyber warfare from our Western point of view, and what is it from the Russian point of view? And from the Russian point of view, in the Russian doctrines and in understanding and the composition of those units, it's much more about information warfare, about informazione barba, which is integral part of it, and it's not in our understanding. By the way, in the Baltic states, it's still more understanding of what the Russians or what the Soviet Union used to be, and what the Russians are understanding what means the cyber warfare. It's also much more the information war is part of it. It's not the case here, and it's of course it's not the case in Britain, Germany, or US. I'm not saying that one is better than the other one. What is important is to understand how much the others do understand it, and how much for Al Qaeda, which is not that relevant these days, but how much for ISIS, the cyber commands. It's about the information warfare, it's about recruitment, it's about fundraising, it's about consolidation of their base, it's about spreading fear in the enemy lines, and how much it is real attacks onto some infrastructure. And there, of course, the capabilities of those are much less in the terms that they are able to attack some infrastructure. But once the world gets into, and what was the example of Iranians calling the hackers of the world to unite and to come to their defense, those can do it as well, sometimes directly, sometimes hidden under different agendas. And you do see a lot of lunatics and a lot of people who are, a lot of hackers who just go and as a part of the sport and as part of training themselves, that they do and join even, that they are not Islamists, but they join these attacks because it's something which they either believe in or they can train themselves. When a lot of those attacks I mentioned on the Israeli Electric Corporation, which are carried on from Russia, the Israeli assessment and Russia from the state authorities, or coming from the circles of the state, their assessment in Israel is that it's more about training themselves and seeing the capabilities and capacity on the other side than really trying to get the damage to the Israeli Electric Corporation. So you can have different reasoning for the attacks and different groups with different motivations can join together in some of the attacks, and then in some cases they are of course more successful because it's harder to cope with that. What do you have to do? It's and this is the parts of this active defense, or this is what you have to really do to start even before you are attacked. Assuming that if you are not target now, you will be target in the nearest future. And at the end, everyone is already target now. It depends what is the level of the threat you are facing. Because, well, the threat analysis, the active defense is to prepare the offensive tools, as I said. And the real core issue is to distinguish what is the relevant from the irrelevant. What are the attacks? What is the nature of the attacks? What is the nature to know your enemy? What is the nature of that? And the enemy of a, and let's put states aside, but the enemy of a bank in Czech Republic is different than the enemy of a bank in Portugal. In some cases, at least in some cases. Because in some cases it's more activists, in some cases it's more theft done through a certain way. In some cases it's different stories. So even if you are part of one large banking family with one owner, if you are part of the KBC, so the KBC, which is ČSOB in Czech Republic, is facing at least slightly different threats and different enemies than the KBC in Belgium and then the KBC in other countries. So we have to really look into and look from within and actively look around. And if you actively look around on the internet, on the open sphere, but also on the dark net, then you could see and you can see who is paying some attention to your bank or to your institution. So you really have to invest into it before. So of course you have to invest into the hardware and software, and into the hardware and software with the experience. Sometimes it's good to develop something on your own, because then no one, or then it's harder for the others to have the access, etc. But then if you don't have the experience from various attacks and various scenarios from around the world, you are not able to put it into your system. So it's a complicated game of how much you use what is like generally on the market and how much you accommodate it into with your local experience, how much you change it, and it's and this even, then I'm talking about the hardware and software, but this again, the configuration is done by the people. It's not that, of course, all hardware and software is done by the people originally, but this is done by the people who are going to be securing your networks. So even this goes into how you get together the puzzle, the pieces of the hardware and software together. This is the start of why you need the people and trained people and good people and well-paid people to work for you. And of course, I mentioned how you can use the social engineering to get into various systems. Yes, it's important to say and to restate, because I already said that it's not only the IT department. And it's not only about the data and the money. Yes, and so it's crucial that at least in every unit or every organization. But if you are talking about critical infrastructure, that it really goes into the triangle of the CEO, CSO, and CIO. Why CEO? Well, first, then CEO is deciding about where the money is going to go. And it's a lot about the money, because there's not going to be a bigger package of the money. Usually it's not the case. But you can redistribute it differently. But who decides, for example, and it's not very clear, and sometimes it is in some documents, but some documents which people usually don't know where the documents are. And some documents are contradicting each other, and they are not updated on the regular basis. And at the end, the documents are documents on the paper, and once something is happening, then you have to react. Why the CEO should be trained? Because it's not clear, for example, who will shut down if there is it doesn't have to be a nuclear plant. If there is a power plant in Czech Republic, big one, or in any countries where we are coming from, big one being attacked, who decides to shut it down or not? It's not the IT department, and it doesn't have the responsibility, usually. And it should not have the responsibility. It's not the security department. It's sometimes not linked directly together. It's being linked more and more. It's the management. If it's a nuclear plant, or if it's the real part of the critical infrastructure, maybe it is the Minister of Energy. Maybe it's some other state institution which can decide it. Yes. If you are deciding about that, then you can really get into the blackout scenarios. If it's successful attack, or if you shut it down even if it was not the successful attack. Sometimes the decision, and this decision which has to be made from the top, is about really, do you push the button delete, which by that you usually stop the attack, but you can create more damage than if you keep the attack going. The damage that it's really you stop everything and to restart it is much harder, and it costs money and it takes time. It's also by stopping the delete button, you lose a lot of evidence. What was the source of the attack? What was the attack? And if you lose it, then it's much harder to imagine what will be the next attack. Because in every attack which is already on, you should think about the next attacks. Because the attacks are not the last attacks. It's usually those who are attacking are, sometimes you can be random, but usually you have to think about knowing what the attack was about, understanding the attack, setting it aside from the critical part of the infrastructure, but maybe keep it going, that you really understand what it is about. And there, the decision making from on the top is really key, because then it's a decision of the owners, or shareholders, or the responsible people from the state point of view, who do decide about a lot of money at least, and sometimes about, of course, lives of the people. The guys from the IT department, or even the CSO, the head of IT and the head of the CSO, they usually don't have mobile phone numbers to their CEO. To call, or to someone who is responsible from the CEO point, from the board manager who is responsible. So what do you do on Saturday? If those, and this is the training scenarios what CyberGym does with a lot of different clients from around the world, at the end, if they run it, if they attack it, and then the IT guy says, okay, now I have to decide and I have to shut it down, but I don't have the authority. I have to go to the legal department and I have to go to the management. At the moment which you have to really decide fast, you don't have the number for the key manager. And you cannot call him and say, listen, now this is the situation, you decide. Maybe you can say, okay, I would recommend to do this, but it's your decision and you must decide it. And this doesn't function, because it's not in the concept, it's not in the DNA of the organizations and institutions to think about it like that. And this is exactly the weakness of the systems, because at the end you attack those weak points. You don't attack the most sophisticated firewall of all the firewalls, because you can go around. I will give you another example of what happened, for example, accidentally in Israel. There is still only one highway tunnel in Israel, in the northern Israel, near Haifa, or around the third largest city of Haifa. It was infected by the Syrians. The Israelis didn't realize it. The purpose of the infection was to monitor the flow of the military vehicles going through the tunnel into the north and south, which I don't know what they did imagine they would be doing with those informations, but they did infect the system. And once it was discovered, they shut it down, because they wanted to destroy the evidence, and they destroyed some of the evidence at least. It was shut down, and the Israelis learned about the problem that the Syrians thought that they have discovered it. The Israelis did not discover the problem. And then to delete the evidence and to get out of the system, they stopped the functioning of the monitoring system, of all the cameras. Because this was the purpose, to monitor the flow of the vehicles. The purpose was not to shut the system, or not to shut the tunnel. At the end, accidentally, once you shut the system of the cameras, automatically the whole tunnel stops. So the whole tunnel in the middle of the main traffic jam and everything stopped, and it was stopped for about 9 hours before it could be restarted. That's how some of the systems are interconnected. So sometimes even if you do not want to intentionally shut the tunnel and cause this kind of damage, you can do it. So you can even plan it. You can plan that to infect the CCTV system and monitoring system in some tunnel, by shutting it down, you can bet that I don't know if in most, but at least in many tunnels, you would be successful in shutting the whole tunnel down and stopping the whole flow of the transportation for at least many hours, creating huge traffic jams. And at the end, you can count it into money how much you have lost. This is basically the end of the presentation and the end of what I wanted to talk about. What we are talking about regarding the cyber war is how much similar it is to the regular battlefield, how much we should get prepared for that. So of course, it's about the costs and benefits and about the estimates, how much you want to invest. So you have to know, it's about risk assessment at the end. So you have to know what you are facing as a state or as individual parts of the infrastructure or as individual companies. What is at stake and how much you will invest into it. And my last point, and this is not the advertisement for the cyber gym, but the last crucial lesson from the Israeli experience is really to focus on people more than only on machines, which is being done and where a lot of money is being spent and where it's much easier to spend the money with the procurement of new systems. At the end, some of those new systems are not plugged into the overall system, and they sometimes stay somewhere in the storage because they were not procured in a smart way, and some pieces are still missing.